Part 46. Global Copy, My Talent is Called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 451. Why did you fall down before I took action? With a depressed look on her face, Luzaoki kicked the evil thornflower, which was lying on the ground motionless, and then turned to look at Zuyan, who was touching his big baby with a silly smile on his face, and helplessly spread his hands. The monkey head that got the stick is different, and its combat power has increased significantly. All the way through the level, almost no one asked Luzaoki to take any action. In other words, even if it was just relying on Zuyan's own strength, he should have the ability to clear these levels. No wonder he was so familiar with the monsters behind him. It is estimated that he had already been beaten once before he was demonized. Let's go, Luzaoki waved her hand and continued to move towards the next level. The rest of the journey went smoothly. Even though it was becoming more and more difficult for Zuyan to deal with the monsters, with him as a human shield in front to resist damage and cover. Luzaoki in the back naturally has a very comfortable output environment. The left hand used a treatment plan to give the big monkey 2 mouthfuls of milk, and the right hand used a few sword energy to slowly torture the opponent. Don't be too comfortable. The further you go to the previous level, the monkey's expression becomes more solemn, and he becomes more manic during the battle, and even his eyes can't stop spitting out flames. Luzaoki almost thought that her prayer of Wuchen was malfunctioning. Of course, it turned out that there was nothing wrong with his skills, and Zuyan was still very rational, but there seemed to be something ahead that made him feel extremely angry. Luzaoki secretly speculated. Soon, one person and one giant ape reached a brand new level. This place once seemed like a garden, filled with dead, dilapidated flowers, plants and trees everywhere. Not far away, 2 tall, withered trees stood quietly in the center of the garden, exuding a desolate and dead atmosphere. Luzaoki recognized these 2 trees. It's called the eucalyptus tree. When Mr. Lu was a child, he followed the Saint Seiya comics that were very popular at that time. For this reason, he also went to understand the background stories of each Saint Seiya and each other's unique moves. This eucalyptus tree is not a simple tree. It is the sacred tree that is said to be the place where Buddha attained nirvana. Legend has it that one day when Sakyamuni was 80 years old, he walked into the Shalani Yadi river to take a bath, and then walked ashore into the sage forest. He spread grass and leaves between the 2 larger eucalyptus trees, and laid the sangha on them. Then he turned his head to the north and west, rested his head on his right hand, and lay on the sangha on his right side. Then he passed away. The eucalyptus tree is also famous for this. Saint Saka is known as the person closest to God, and the God here refers to Buddha. Therefore, there are also eucalyptus trees in the place where he practices. In this deserted garden, these 2 towering dry eucalyptus trees, full of desolate atmosphere, undoubtedly add a strange and gloomy atmosphere to the place. When Zuyan saw these 2 trees, his eyes widened even more. A faint white smoke came out of his nostrils. He kept breathing heavily and strode towards the eucalyptus tree. Luzaoki could only speed up his actions to keep up with Zuyan. After getting a little closer, with Luzaoki's eyesight, he noticed that the strangest thing was not the 2 dry trees, but a huge Buddha statue lying on its side under the tree. This dark golden Buddha statue lay quietly under 2 linden trees. At first, Luzaoki saw only a shadow in the distance and thought it was rolling mountains. After getting a little closer, I could see clearly that this thing was clearly a super Buddha statue several times larger than Zuyan. It was lying on its side between 2 eucalyptus trees, pinching the lotus fingers with one hand and supporting its head with the other hand. There was a weird smile on the corner of its mouth and its eyes were closed. Luzaoki was attracted by the huge symbol exposed on its chest. Because this symbol is quite distinctive. You should know that the Buddha beads that generally represent Sakyamuni have a special mark on the chest, which is swastika. This often symbolizes an auspicious sign, which can emit thousands of dazzling lights, which is what everyone knows as the Buddha's light. But the markings on this Buddha statue are completely different. It is the opposite of. The two are not only depicted in opposite directions, but also have completely different meanings. The former is considered to mean good luck, compassion, and renunciation, the latter means the law of the jungle, annexation, and conquest. Such a symbol was carved on the chest of a Buddha statue and placed in such a strange garden, which made Luzaoki's hair stand on end and her face look solemn. Go against the Buddha. Or should it be called Mara? Of course, this is unlikely to be the real deity, just a statue of Mara. If it was really him who was here, Luzaoki would just give up the struggle and just lie down and go to sleep. But even so, he didn't dare to be careless at all. After all, no one knew how weird this thing was. But before Luzaoki could carefully test it out, Zuyan had already taken action first. It roared in the sky at the Buddha statue, then strode forward, leaped high, and hit the demon statue with a huge stick. And something even weirder happened. The original demon statue was only several times larger than Zuyan, and its height when lying down was not much higher than Zuyan's. But as Zuyan charged towards the demon statue, its figure couldn't stop shrinking. Almost every few steps he takes, he becomes a shadow smaller than his previous size. When it actually came in front of the Buddha statue, its body was not even half of its previous height. And the stick it raised high could only barely reach the opponent's body. Really jump up and hit someone on the knee. Damn it, what kind of outrageous method is this? Luzaoki was also shocked by this scene. He quickly mobilized all his magic power to check whether any unknown rules of power were exerted on his body. But what made him relieved was that this strange force did not affect him. Maybe it's because he is still relatively far away. Zuyan had just acquired the iron wishful iron in his hand. The moment it came into contact with the statue of Mara, the originally white and jade-colored stick suddenly slowly turned dark starting from the head. It was obviously contaminated by some evil force. At the same time, the silver light originally emitted by the stick also became dim. It seemed that it could not withstand such a terrible power, and it broke with a click. What a terrible evil spirit! If you are even half contaminated like this, will you still fall into the eternal hell forever? Luzaoki's eyelids twitched. He finally knew what kind of thing Zuyan was demonized by. It's no wonder that the monkey became so angry when he saw this thing, and rushed up to fuck the other person whenever they disagreed. Emotions are the main culprit that caused him to become a monster. After Luzaoki's guidance, the monkey also knew the characteristics of the magic weapon in his hand. He was not surprised that it could not withstand the demonic energy and broke into pieces. Instead, he quickly recited the mantra again, as you wish, follow my wishes, quickly transform quickly. After the formula, the originally sluggish stick seemed to have been hit by verb. It immediately grew stronger and regained its original appearance and became stronger. Luzaoki naturally took in the scene and couldn't help covering his face, with the corners of his mouth twitching. Big brother. This thing is easy to use, but it's not as rough as you. The stick has been restored, but the consumption caused by it is actually paid by you. However, the energetic monkey head didn't care about this at all. Full of resentment, it waved the stick with all its strength and launched 99 and 81 attacks on the golem's face. Each time, the weapon was broken into pieces, and then repaired again, and so on. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 452. Perhaps the monkey head's continuous attacks finally disturbed the golem, causing it to wake up again from its silence. Luzaoki clearly saw that Mologo's originally closed eyes opened slightly. But these little eyelid movements exude an extremely terrifying aura. Almost instantly, Zuyan, who was rushing at the front, was frozen in place. And Luzaoki, who was far away, also felt an extremely chaotic thought forcefully thrust into his mind, trying to turn his brain into a tofu and completely dominate his will. Fortunately, Luzaoki, who already knew that the other party was a demon, had already made preparations, and once again applied the prayer of cleansing to herself and the big monkey, which could purify all abnormal conditions. Successfully exempted from this terrifying demonic attack. Not only that, this level of pollution has been judged as some kind of curse by Luzaoki's skills. Therefore, the next moment, the characteristic ability of Wu Chen prayer is activated. He directly bounced all the demonic energy back. So, Luzaoki watched helplessly as Buddha, who had opened his eyes slightly, suddenly shed dark tears of blood from his eyes, and the originally calm and weird expression on his face suddenly turned ferocious. At this time, Zuyan was completely freed from the control of the demon statue. His fangs protruded from his mouth and he stared at the Buddha statue in front of him unruly. He was about to raise his weapon and continue to attack the opponent. But the next moment, the giant palm of the golem pressed down. Zuyan was photographed into the ground almost instantly. It recreates the classic scene where Brother Monkey was pinned under the Wuzi mountain. Boom! Huge vibrations could be heard. The demon suddenly turned over and sat up from the ground, turning its head slightly as if it was looking at Luzaoki in the distance. Being stared at by this terrifying Mara statue, even the daring Lu couldn't help but feel a little stiff. Gudong. His Adam's apple twitched, he swallowed hard, and muttered in a low voice, "It doesn't make sense. The previous levels were passed with ease. Why did it suddenly become so scary?" But the golem didn't give him much time to complain, and directly stretched out its giant palm to grab him. This palm became overwhelming in an instant, and seemed to be able to wrap everything in the world within it. Luzaoki was shocked. He was about to use his wind form to quickly get out of the attack range of this devil's hand, but he was surprised to find that the surrounding space seemed to be completely frozen, making him unable to move at all. Therefore, the next moment, he was also covered under the Five-Finger Mountain. Eternal fall into reincarnation. A loud and strange voice came into Luzaoki's ears. It's over. This thought flashed through his mind, and before he even had time to regret that he had overestimated himself, his vision went dark and he almost lost consciousness. When Luzaoki opened his eyes blankly, he had completely changed his appearance. At this time, he was wearing a tattered beggar's outfit, all his magic power had been dissipated, and he could not display any of his skills. He rolled over and climbed up from the ground, frowning and looking at his surroundings. This is a huge ruined temple. There are not many intact tiles left on the roof. It can only barely cover the wind and rain. The Buddha statue in the middle of the ruined temple is covered in clay sculptures with many bumps and bruises, as if someone had stripped the golden body from it. The worst thing was the head of the Buddha statue, which was kicked to the ground by someone unknown and rolled to the center of the ruined temple. Judging from the traces, it seems that it has been used as a seat cushion for an unknown period of time. This is an illusion. Luzaoki tilted her head and thought for a while. Then he shook his head again. No, this should be more than a simple illusion. If it was an illusion, with Luzaoki's ability, he could completely destroy it by activating the destroying illusion Dharma Eye. Even though this demon is powerful, Luzaoki still has the assistance of the second skill Insight. The effects of the two SS add 1 skills are superimposed. Not to mention breaking all the magic in the world, it is more than enough to at least see some clues of. However, the scene now displayed in front of Luzaoki is extremely real, and it is basically what can be reflected by constructing an illusion. You know, even if the flower in the mirror, water and moon developed by Luzaoki himself is the most perfect illusion technique, there will still be some sense of disobedience. These feelings of disobedience come from things that Luzaoki has never realized or fully grasped. If Luzaoki can really eliminate these inconsistencies, then he will not be far away from creating a new world. But now, Luzaoki didn't feel the slightest bit awkward in the current environment. Every flower and grass here, even the smell of earth in the air, and the changes in various things in this world, all prove one thing to Luzaoki: this is a living little world. Luzaoki suddenly thought of the voice he heard before falling into coma. Eternally trapped in reincarnation. His face suddenly turned ugly. Finally knew what he had been tricked into. One flower, one world, one leaf, one Bodhi. The legendary Buddha possesses boundless power and can easily create 3,000 worlds and understand the laws of all things. You can even create a whole new world in your sleep for your own practice. This Mara statue clearly imitated this ability and created a means of fighting the enemy. Anyone who is caught by it will be sent into this small world controlled by it and left to its mercy. And if you die in this world, it is possible that he is really dead. The greater possibility is that he will become like Zuyan before, be completely demonized and lose himself. Luzaoki had no doubt that when it used this move, it could even erase Luzaoki's ability and original memory. However, the prayer of Wuchen that Luzaoki had imposed on himself in advance was still strong enough in the end, and he withstood the pressure, so that Luzaoki's true spirit was not ignorant and did not become confused and lose himself. Figuring out the key didn't make Luzaoki feel any better. Because he is worried about something now. How to break the situation. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 453. Wa ha ha ha. Luzaoki jumped up from the ground, looked up to the sky and laughed, her eyebrows dancing and dancing. Even if you use all kinds of methods, what can you do to me? Just now, after he tried to practice, he had clearly perceived one thing. That is, his cultivation speed has not slowed down because of the rotation. What does this mean? This shows that Luzaoki's passive ability, Son of Heaven, is still in effect. Mr. Lu is still Tiandao's dearest and dearest son. In other words, although this magic spell can ban all Luzaoki's skills, it can't prevent his passive abilities that have exceeded the limit from taking effect. And how terrifying is Lu's passivity? Son of Heaven plus everything is allowed plus flying swordsmanship plus Hell's Curse plus extreme swordsmanship plus left hand of God plus 100 deaths will not solve it plus free ultimate intention Kung Fu plus he transforms into the great self Dharma plus the ultimate intent of power. If these passive effects still exist. So what if we fall into a whole new world? There was nothing Maluo could do against him. He can't die at all. Not to mention anything else, just 100 deaths unexplained is enough for someone like Lu to die in 101 different ways in one day before he can be completely killed. Coupled with Luzaoki's passive blessing of combat power and the go-growth ability of strength's ultimate intention. Mr. Lu dares to say that as long as he is given time, he can create a serious immortal body for himself, and even reach the level of proving the Tao through force. No matter how treacherous you are, you still have to drink the foot-washing water from me, Mr. Lu. Luzaoki stood in the ruined temple with her hands on her hips, as if I am already invincible. However, at the next moment, the sky suddenly changed dramatically, with dark clouds and lightning flashing. Luzaoki, who was in the ruined temple, looked at the darkness outside, and suddenly a solemn atmosphere arose in his heart that dark clouds are overwhelming the city and are about to destroy it. Oh! You started targeting him so soon. He muttered, could this Mara be monitoring his movements at any time? But Luzaoki could not survive the passive attack. Instead, she raised her middle finger to the sky and shouted provocatively, it's thundering, it's raining. Go home and collect your clothes. The next moment, a thunder struck the dead wood above his head. Pants. the dry old tree was suddenly ignited by the thunder fire and burst into flames. At the same time, countless sparks fell down along with the dry branches, hitting Luzaoki head and face. "Scared me." Luzaoki screamed twice and quickly swatted away the debris on her body. But the next moment, he seemed to realize that he had lost his momentum, and shouted angrily, "If you have the ability, you can just kill me. You think I'm afraid of you?" As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderbolt fell straight into the ruined temple, instantly shocking Luzaoki, who was still shouting. Luzaoki's current body is not as refined as before. It's just an ordinary person's body. How can it withstand such an onslaught of thunder and fire? When Gigi turned into a charred body, covered in black smoke, he slowly fell to the ground, and the breath of life quickly dissipated. Seemingly seeing that the target was dead, the dark clouds in the sky began to slowly disappear after a pause. However, just after Luzaoki's breath completely dissipated, a new and vigorous vitality swarmed out of the broken body again. Click. 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 Almost in an instant, all the parts of Luzaoki's body that had turned into black charcoal split open, revealing brand new, snow-white skin. All injuries were completely repaired almost in an instant. Luzaoki opened her eyes, rolled over from the ground and got up. She couldn't help but frown slightly and muttered, "Sure enough, this feeling of death is really terrible." Although the previous Luzaoki also had the ultimate passive of death without explanation, but because his own strength was already at the top level, this passive was used for hundreds of chapters, but its effect was not triggered even once. Today can be regarded as the eldest daughter's first time riding in a sedan chair. It seemed that the target he was targeting was not completely dead, and the dark clouds in the sky were a little confused. After spinning in the air for a long time, they decisively regrouped. And then immediately, pants! Another thunder struck. This time the thunder was even more powerful. It penetrated the broken roof of the ruined temple almost instantly and hit Luzaoki directly. Then Luzaoki, who had been killed by lightning once, was not afraid of this rapid thunder. The characteristic unrivaled way of 100 deaths cannot be solved has taken effect. His body became more insulated than a rubber man. This delay can do nothing to him. He just set fire to all the remaining clothes on his body. Luzaoki quickly patted away the clothes that had turned into flying catkins on her body, gritted her teeth and said, "I'm giving you face, right? Just chop me." "What do you mean by burning all my clothes? I don't want to lose face." Then the dark clouds controlled by Mara would not listen to his advice. Seeing that the thunder was ineffective, they increased their power, and the dark clouds suddenly intensified and rolled. Countless thunders began to brew. There seemed to be endless divine power mixed in with it. The next moment, hundreds of thunderbolts fell at the same time, striking towards the ruined temple. Boom! Countless loud noises were superimposed together to form a continuous explosion. How could this ruined temple withstand such a test? It collapsed directly. "Oh! You're going to attack my temple, right?" And Luzaoki was undoubtedly buried in the ruins after she screamed. Dark clouds were still rolling in the sky, seeming to be observing Luzaoki's movements. After a long time, the broken stone was pushed away by a bloody palm, and a middle finger rose into the sky. Dead silence. There is an unspeakable silence in the air. The dark clouds surged again for a moment, but they seemed to have realized that there was nothing they could do about the sky, and slowly dispersed helplessly. Luzaoki, who had been crushed to death once, struggled to push away the rubble on her body and gasped for air. Just at this moment, he experienced 3 deaths. The first time he was struck to death by lightning, the second time he was crushed to death, and the third time he was suffocated to death. Fortunately, he had already died once and was permanently immune to these ways of death. This type of attack will no longer be able to cause any damage to him. Luzaoki staggered up from the ground. He looked at the injuries all over his body and couldn't help but shake his head with a wry smile. I feel that if I don't think of a way to bandage the wound, I will probably use my fourth resurrection soon. Bleed to death. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 454. Are you awake? Luzaoki drowsily opened her eyes from her coma, only to see a peaceful smiling face. This is a kind-hearted old man. He quickly wanted to sit up from the bed, but was held down by the old man. Little brother, you have lost too much blood now. It is not suitable to exercise and you need to rest. Luzaoki's expression was dazed for a moment, and then she remembered that she was naked and staggered out of the ruins of the ruined temple. In the end, she collapsed on the roadside due to excessive blood loss and was unable to survive. It seems that he did not die, but was rescued by a kind person passing by. Old man, who are you? Perhaps because he had been unconscious for too long without speaking, Luzaoki's voice was slightly hoarse. The old man laughed and said, I am a fisherman from Liangzhou City. I was going into the mountains today and happened to see you lying on the roadside, so I brought you back. As he spoke, he paused and said, Did the little brother get robbed by bandits? Luzaoki smiled bitterly and did not explain. What he was experiencing now was much worse than being robbed by bandits. The old man frowned and hummed, These days, these bandits are becoming more and more rampant. They don't care about blocking roads and robbing people, but they actually strip people naked and throw them aside. Having said this, the old man seemed to realize that he had made a mistake. He glanced at Luzaoki's face, coughed and said, My little brother has been unconscious for so long, so he must be hungry, right? I'll get you a bowl of rice porridge. With that said, he turned around, opened the door and walked out. Luzaoki noticed the layout of the room this time. A shabby wooden table, an oil lamp on the table, a raincoat hanging on the wall, a rough linen cloth on the bed, and a simple mosquito net. It can be seen that this is similar to an ordinary farmer's family in ancient social background. Nothing seems suspicious. Luzaoki narrowed his eyes. I didn't expect that this small world of Emologo has evolved to this extent. It really shouldn't be underestimated. But he frowned, knowing that he was being targeted by the demon who controlled the world. If he came into contact with this kind old man, he was afraid of bringing disaster to the other party. It's just that my physical strength has not yet recovered, and it is a bit difficult to walk even if I want to. Fortunately, maybe he has been unconscious for long enough, and his passive ability Extreme Power has been triggered. The next moment, Luzaoki felt a warm current spreading inside his body, which made him feel shaken. He knew that he was a little stronger now than before. This kind of strength is comprehensive, not only reflected in strength and speed, but also in recovery ability and anti-strike ability. This allowed him to regain some strength and get up. Seeing a pair of crude linen clothes nearby, it seemed that the old man had prepared them for him. He didn't care whether they fit or not, so he pulled them up and hurriedly put them on, ready to run away. But as soon as she reached the door, Luzaoki's ears twitched slightly and she heard subtle conversations. Hey! This man! Don't worry, you will be satisfied with the package this time. This is the voice of the old man. He said with a smile, that young man has tender skin and tender flesh. At first glance, he looks like the master he has been pampered since he was a child. It will definitely satisfy the big men in the city. Humph, I hope so. This was the voice of a big man with a rough voice. He said arrogantly. Still the old rules, as long as you catch my eye, this 5 baht money is yours. Hey. It's easy to say. It's easy to say. Shall we inspect the goods first? Then let's inspect the goods. As he said this, footsteps came towards Luzaoki. Luzaoki. Originally, he thought that he was rescued by kind people after he fell into a coma. From the tone of his voice, he couldn't be a human trafficker, right? When the old man opened the door, he saw Luzaoki sitting at the table, looking at him with an expressionless expression. She couldn't help but smile, and said with a forced smile, "Little brother, why are you up? Didn't I tell you to have a good rest?" Luzaoki ignored him, but turned her attention to the man behind him who was taller than him. This man should be about 1.8 meters tall, with a slim build but a sinister face, and a pair of triangular eyes that look very sinister. Just by looking at his appearance, there is no way to connect him with the previous voice. At this moment, his small eyes were shining, and he was looking at Luzaoki's appearance with great satisfaction, and the corners of his mouth could not help but raise a smile that could not be hidden. He laughed, patted the old man's back vigorously, almost staggering him, and said with a smile, "Not bad, not bad. The quality is quite good this time. I'll give you another 5 baht." The old man's face lit up with joy and he quickly bowed and thanked him. Luzaoki sighed inwardly, it seemed that it was confirmed. These two guys should be the legendary human traffickers. I never thought that someone like me, Lu, who has been famous all his life, would one day be bullied by a dog. The old man turned to Luzaoki and smiled, "Young man, the old man took it upon himself to find a good way out for you. I believe you will be satisfied." "I'm satisfied with you, big-headed ghost." Luzaoki only felt that the face of the old man in front of him, who originally looked kind, was so disgusting that he could not even pass for the big and honest monkey with a sharp mouth and monkey cheeks. The big man on the side took out a money bag from his arms and threw it to the old man, and then said in an arrogant voice, "Stop talking nonsense, pay with one hand and deliver the goods with the other." When he was done, he pointed at Luzaoki and said, "Young pretty boy, come with me honestly. I'm telling you, don't try to play any tricks. For a skinny guy like you, I can crush 3 people to death with one slap." Luzaoki shrugged and said helplessly, "Do I still have a choice?" As he spoke, he stood up and slowly approached the big man. The big man said arrogantly, "You are quite smart, kid." The old man just opened the money bag happily and counted the money, ignoring Luzaoki's actions. In their opinion, the boy's old injury has not healed, and with his small body, even if he resists, he will not make any waves at all. However, little did they know that what stood in front of them was a veritable hidden dragon. Lu has gone through more than 10 million battles all the way to this day. Although after gaining strength, he inevitably neglected some of his fighting skills and turned into a crushing force without any fancy. But this does not mean that he has completely lost his previous fighting skills. Not to mention that he also has a bunch of passive abilities to back him up. So he moved slowly, seemingly exhausted, but in fact he was accumulating strength while looking for opportunities to overcome the weak with the strong. Soon, his slow movements aroused the dissatisfaction of the big man. "Isn't this guy a sick man?" The big man muttered impatiently, stretched out his big hand to grab Luzaoki. "Be careful, kid. Good chance." Luzaoki's eyes flashed. He leaned aside to avoid the big man's grasping palm, and suddenly stepped forward, using Brother Kun's unique skill, Iron Mountain Fuck. Although this blow could not cause any real damage to the big man due to the lack of strength in Luzaoki's body, it hit the air point between the big man's waist and abdomen, causing his face to flush red. Somewhat out of breath. Then at the next moment, Luzaoki grabbed something from his waist with her backhand. Then there was a flash of cold light. The big man's eyes suddenly widened, he made a ho-ho sound in his mouth, covered his neck with his hands and began to struggle. Blood kept flowing out from between his palms. It looked like it was going to die. The old man seemed to be half a beat too slow before he reacted. He pointed at Luzaoki in astonishment and screamed, "SSA Rilong. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck." Chapter 455. At this time, Luzioki's face was spattered with blood, but her eyes were bright and energetic, looking at the trembling old man with burning eyes, and the dagger in her hand was still flowing with blood. Fortunately, the big man had a dagger on his waist. Without this weapon, Luzioki would not have dared to attack the big man directly. After all, with his current physical condition, he would probably be able to bully the 70-year-old man. If it were a slightly stronger young man, he would have no choice but to surrender. The old man screamed for a long time, and then he seemed to have regained consciousness as if he had just woken up from a dream. He kept retreating, but accidentally tripped on the threshold, his foot went weak, and he fell from the stone steps into the courtyard. Don't blame him for being as timid as a mouse. In fact, although Luzioki's strength is no longer what it used to be, her memory has not been lost. There are quite a few innocent souls who died at his hands. A little bit of murderous intent would be enough for this old guy to endure. It was this murderous intention that was almost condensed into substance that affected the big man and the old man, making their reaction worse than that of the weak Luzioki, and that was why he succeeded in killing him in one fell swoop. Seeing Luzioki slowly advancing towards him with an expressionless expression, the old man's legs bounced on the ground and screamed, "You! Don't come here! Do not kill me! Spare my life!" Unfortunately, Luzioki was completely indifferent to his begging for mercy. Not to mention that he is a creature derived from Emoluto's small world and has nothing to do with Luzioki. Just talking about him trafficking in people and buying Luzioki's head has already been used by Luzioki. I was sentenced to death in my heart. Guessing the reason for his own physical strength, Luzioki simply threatened the other party, asked for some basic information, and then quickly sent the old man away. Of course, after defeating the monsters, Luzioki did not forget the fine tradition of being an adventurer, touching corpses. The money bag that the old man was holding tightly in his hands before he died was snatched away by Luzioki without mercy, and there was even a trace of residual warmth left on it. Luzioki took a look at the currency in this world. It was very different from the ancient coins in his memory. It was round on the outside and square on the inside, with 4 big characters engraved on it, Zhi Zheng Tongbao. Luzioki? Is it the Zhi Zheng Tongbao that I understand? He had a strange look on his face. After thinking about it for a while, he just thought it was a coincidence. Zhai's Hungtongbao was the last version of currency in the Yuan dynasty. Here is a little popular science. Well, actually, I am also from Beidou. Don't be too serious. Smoke curls from the kitchen. This old guy really didn't lie to Luzioki. He really made rice porridge. Luzioki entered the kitchen and discovered that there was not only rice porridge, but also a steamed fish and 2 steamed buns. Yo! The food is pretty good. Naturally, he accepted it with a polite smile. He happened to be hungry, so he directly picked up the steamed buns from the shelf and put it in his mouth. It's just different from the big, soft steamed buns he imagined. Although this steamed bun is steaming hot, it is both woody and hard. It cannot be said that it tastes bad, it can only be said that it has no taste at all. It looks like it was made from unfermented dough and has no elasticity at all. Before Luzioki could swallow her mouthful of steamed buns, she quickly filled up another bowl of porridge and drank it without worrying about burning her mouth. This rice porridge is also bland, with a few grains of rice barely visible in a bowl. That's right, after all, this is an ancient social background, and the labor force is not yet developed. It is not bad for ordinary people to have a stutter. Especially old people like this who are almost losing their ability to work. Even more terrifying was being directly destroyed. At this point, he finally recovered some of his ability to protect himself. After all, I am still not cruel enough to myself. A night of silence. This place is okay for a temporary stay, but if you stay too long. The soldier was obviously very satisfied with his attitude. He touched the thing he put in his palm, A smile appeared on his face, and he waved his hand to signal him to come in. Then the soldier leader took aim at a woman with a child. He pointed at her seriously and shouted, "You! Come here. I want to check." No wonder he embarked on the path of human trafficking. There were a few idle soldiers standing at the gate of the city, holding weapons and checking the passing crowd impatiently. One of the soldiers seemed to be the leader. He swaggered to the front of the crowd lining up to enter the city and kicked the luggage carried by a young man at the front of the team. This tall young man faced the soldiers holding weapons and staring eagerly. She could only swallow her anger and smile, then stuffed something into his hand, and whispered to please, "Sir, it's a small business, just do it. Let me in. So he can develop properly, but he must not delay it for too long." In fact, Luzioki even had a whim on more than one occasion. If she starved to death herself, would she be able to trigger the 100 deaths unexplained effect and gain the ability to be immune to starvation? However, nothing unexpected happened during this period, and Luzioki stayed there very peacefully. Go to Daliang City to find out? The flow of time in the dungeon is no slower than in reality, let alone the small world of Mora. The young man nodded quickly and bowed, and walked in with his things in hand with all thanks. Luzioki found a pair of chopsticks and, regardless of the smell of blood in the courtyard, sat in the kitchen and started eating. He lost too much blood and was unconscious for an unknown amount of time. It was the right moment when he was hungry, so the food came at the right time, so naturally he didn't care about being too particular. It's a pity that he has never been able to make such a decision. Where's your guide? Take it out. Luzioki decided to take the initiative. After filling her stomach 2 or 3 times, Luzioki took a long breath, frowned and looked at the 2 corpses on the ground, and shook her head slightly. Secondly, although this old man is alone, he will inevitably have friends from far away and near. If he visits and sees Luzioki who is still recovering, he can't ask Lu to drag them all away. Therefore, Luzioki did not intend to stay here for a long time. After simply dragging the 2 bodies aside and burying them hastily, Luzioki returned to the house again and began to meditate and practice with the strength restored after eating and drinking. Daliang City is not a large city. The mottled marks on the city wall that have been in disrepair seem to tell its loneliness. What's that bulging thing on your chest? Take it out and let me see. But you don't know how much time will be wasted in this way. Until this day, the extreme intent of power was triggered again, and his body recovered to a point where it was somewhat stronger than an ordinary strong young man. In fact, in his current state, it would be best to find a stable place to live in peace, and when he reaches a later stage of development, he can directly seek revenge from Mara. I didn't know if the big man had any accomplices at first, and if he found them, it would be another problem. Luzioki has been busy practicing these days. Because there is surplus food prepared by the old man, Luzioki does not have to worry about food. Although this food is not much, it is barely enough for Luzioki to make ends meet. In addition, he recultivated his magic power, was familiar with the road along the way, and had the blessing of the passive Son of Heaven's Way, and he quickly entered the door. With the flow of magic power, a dozen or so big men couldn't get close to him. He was afraid that when he finally got out, it would be thousands of years later and the world had changed drastically. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 456. Lu Yin. Not to mention how the ashamed and angry woman responded to the soldier's teasing. After Luzioki here regained her strength, her perception ability greatly increased, and she took all the movements at the front of the team into her mind, thoughtfully. It turns out that I need this thing when I go to town. Of course Luzioki didn't, but he immediately thought of a countermeasure. If you don't have it yourself, you can ask someone else to borrow it. As he spoke, he cast his malicious eyes on the well-dressed middle-aged man not far away. This fat-headed and big-eared man is extremely vulgar and arrogant. He had been scolding others for a while before, and now he is muttering something impatiently. He probably means complaining that there are too many untouchables entering the city. It delayed him from doing important things. Seeing Luzaoki staring at him, he stared back. "What are you looking at? A rude fellow. There's nothing we can do about it." Luzaoki shrugged. "The decision is yours. Flying dragon explores the clouds." Of course, Luzaoki definitely doesn't know this authentic magic. It's just that now that he has a lot of cultivation, and his physical attributes far exceed those of the other party, he can naturally steal and replace others without the other party noticing. I have to say, the queue into the city is really long. In ancient times, many ordinary people outside the city lived in the countryside dozens of miles away from the city. They had to pack up their things and go to the market almost before dawn. Luzaoki arrived not too early. By the time the queue of people entering the city reached him, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. However, he looked like a lean and handsome man at the moment. He was dressed in shabby coarse clothes and had a guide in his hand. Naturally, he did not attract the attention of these soldiers, who were no better than local gangsters. He did a simple interrogation. "Just let him walk into the city." Luzaoki stepped into the city with her left foot, and did not forget to look back at the middle-aged man who was waiting in line soon, and smiled slightly. Sure enough, given the arrogance of this man, after losing the road guide, he almost immediately got into a fight with the soldiers, and then there was the sound of ouch, ouch, ouch being beaten. But the culprit who caused all this to happen, Luzaoki, just flicked her sleeves and walked calmly on the streets of Liangcheng, not taking this matter to heart at all. The streets of this dilapidated ancient city are not too spacious. The ground is paved with muddy bluestone slabs. Many places have become potholed due to lack of timely repairs. In addition, it rained heavily yesterday. The scene on the streets is not the same at this moment. It's wonderful. It's just that Luzaoki was completely attracted by the food on the street at the moment and didn't even notice the filth on the ground. These past few days, the clear soup was so watery that he almost couldn't get any fat or water out of his stomach. Now when he saw the sesame cake stalls and steamed bun shops on the roadside, naturally his eyes watered and left the corner of his mouth. Luzaoki has no habit of wronging herself. I simply found a restaurant immediately and waved to the waiter when I entered the door, "Give me a copy of all the signature dishes in your restaurant." This posture confused the Hakas, who were good at observing words and emotions. This guy is almost skinny, and he is dressed in coarse clothes. How dare he ask for the signature dish as soon as he comes up? Luzaoki seemed to sense that the other party was looking down on others, so she couldn't help but hum, reached into her pocket and took out a heavy bag of silver, slammed it on the table, rolled her eyes and said, "What are you looking at?" "Sir, I have a lot of money." This money will naturally not belong to Luzaoki. In fact, apart from the fact that part of the money here was looted by Luzaoki from the old man's residence and the two bodies, the other large part came from the unlucky middle-aged man. Even this wallet is from him. Joke. In fact, the middle-aged man was beaten because he lost his way and his money. He became so angry that he blamed all of this on the inaction of the soldiers. After all, his things were lost while queuing up. After eating and drinking, Luzaoki successfully settled the bill and left the inn. Hearing the crisp metallic symphony, the waiter's eyes lit up and he quickly asked Luzaoki to sit down, then ordered him drinks and food. "Boy! Hand over the purse in your hand." It wasn't until Luzaoki wandered to a secluded corner that she was blocked by a group of people. Oh! When the leading man saw this scene, his expression changed drastically and he quickly touched his arms. "Brothers, this is a million words, Why don't you give support and encouragement to Xiao Poja? I won't refuse any free gifts. The inns in the city are black shops. At this moment, he had already sensed that someone was quietly following him. Lu Zhaoqi took out 3 money bags of different shapes with a smooth touch, shook them in his hands, and said with a smile. But Lu Zhaoqi frowned slightly. The so-called dangerous world is nothing more than a joke in front of his immortal body. Lu Zhaoqi's face remained calm, but she was quite interested in seeing what they were going to do. The thief never leaves? Is it possible that this is still a black shop? If he just lacked a guide, why would he be beaten so hard? Thinking of this, Lu Zhaoqi smiled instead. Faced with a dozen strong men surrounding her, Lu Zhaoqi was calm and unafraid. There was no fear on her face, and she looked extraordinary. He was not afraid of any danger at all, relying on the fact that he had fully recovered 100 deaths are unexplained. If Lu Zhaoqi took out his money bag so blatantly, he would naturally attract others' attention. Because the moment he sat down, he clearly felt several eyes falling on him, as if they were real. That is really the most ridiculous thing in the world. He walked around the street, and the people behind him followed him secretly. Or maybe it's this small purse containing an unknown jade pendant. After a quarrel, he was picked up. One of the big men pointed at Lu Zhaoqi and shouted, his eyes widened with a ferocious attitude. Or this purse with the silver in it? It was obvious that the hostile look before was not from the inn. Lu Zhaoqi raised her eyebrows, then you want this purse with copper coins? Lu Zhaoqi had already done it herself, how could it be as simple as just using him as a guide? But even the black shop Lu Zhaoqi was not afraid at all. Just pay the money honestly and that's it. I think so, after all, wealth should not be revealed in vain. But from other resting people. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 457. Naturally, these 3 money bags cannot belong to Lu Zhaoqi himself. The owner was looking at his very pretentious behavior with a confused but shocked expression. Lu Zhaoqi's Khas River god really shocked the group of strong men at the moment. Although his cultivation level is gone, all his skills have disappeared, and even his body is not his own. But the magic power Lu Zhaoqi cultivated is real. Moreover, he has never forgotten the ability flowers in the mirror, moon in the water that he developed before. With his current state and a little bit of magic power, if he wanted to hide from the perception of these ordinary people and pick up all their belongings, it would be as easy as digging into a bag. Eh? That wallet is mine. One of the strong men finally reacted, touched himself and pointed at the shriveled little money bag in Lu Zhaoqi's hand, and shouted angrily. Give me my money bag back. As he said that, he stepped forward to snatch it. Wait. But his behavior was stopped by the leading man. This person has a good appearance, with thick eyebrows and big eyes, and a dignified appearance. He looks like a loyal and courageous person. His eyes shone with shrewdness. He waved his hand to stop his brother's rude behavior. He immediately bowed respectfully to Lu Zhaoqi and said, My Excellency, Zhu Kongba of the Red Scarf Army, may I ask who you are, an expert? Lu Zhaoqi didn't take it seriously at first, but when he heard the name Zhu Kongba, his head was stuck for a moment before he realized it. Etc. Red Scarf Army Zhu Kongba? Damn it! Isn't this Zhu Yuanzhang? Yes, Lu Zhaoqi suddenly thought of the familiar appearance of the coins he saw at first, and the name of the dynasty he learned from others, Day 1. In a flash of lightning, everything was connected in Lu Zhaoqi's mind. His eyes suddenly widened and he looked at the man with a simple and honest expression in front of him, his mouth slightly open and speechless. Lu Zhaoqi's mind was almost completely blank at the moment. This is precisely because he figured it out. He was obviously sent into the small world by Mara using some means. But why did he appear in a dynasty that was so similar to ancient China? It felt like he was transported back in time to the late Yuan and early Ming dynasties. Although he himself is a time traveler, he is not completely unable to accept the problem of second time travel. But Mara, is he so capable of sending him back from another world to a small broken ball? Even if there is, the time doesn't match up. So, Lu Zioqi now began to wonder if she had fallen victim to a trick similar to her own flower in the mirror. All of this was evolved by Mo Luo based on Lu Zioqi's subconscious. He opened his mouth and said after a long time, "You said your name is Zhu Kongba." The man opposite nodded and cupped his hands towards him. Lu Zioqi looked strange and said, "You shouldn't have been a monk for a period of time and followed others to beg for help." A look of surprise flashed through Zhu Kongba's eyes, and his attitude towards Lu Zioqi became more respectful, even seeming a little reserved. "I did travel with the master for a period of time." "Okay, okay, stop talking nonsense, keep the slogan." Lu Zioqi waved her hands with a headache, and said casually, "Burn my remains with a blazing holy fire." "What's the next sentence?" Zhu Kongba? Seeing his confused look, Lu Zioqi asked again, "Then do you know how to get to Wudane Mountain?" Zhu Kongba nodded, "I know this." After a pause, he asked again, "Sir, who is?" Before he finished speaking, Lu Zioqi interrupted him with a wave of his hand and said lightly, "The secret must not be leaked." But at this time, he said to himself thoughtfully, "It seems that it is not the low martial world of Yishan slaying dragon, but the development of the world is closer to the real history." Zhu Kongba was confused as he listened to what Lu Zioqi was muttering. He could only vaguely hear the words dragon slaying and development of the world. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart, and his attitude towards Lu Zioqi became even more respectful. The men on the side were still a little confused, so they leaned in front of him and whispered, "Brother, that person took our joint token." As he said this, there was a fierce glint in his eyes, and there was no need to say more about the implication. Zhu Kongba glared at him fiercely and shouted, "I have my own sense of discretion." Lu Zioqi, who was on the side, naturally took all of this into consideration. He smiled bitterly, but hoped that the other party would take action. In Buddhist illusions, he calculated that the Buddha even almost overthrew the Tathagata and succeeded in ascending to the throne. If Lu Zioqi kills him, will it just fulfill his wish and allow him to achieve some ulterior purpose or to murder Lu Zioqi? Then kill this Zhu Kongba. If this world is real. So, you said, this character similar to the Lord of Destiny coincidentally appeared next to Lu Zioqi, could it be arranged by the other party? But he didn't. This also means that if there are no accidents, Lu Zioqi will have enough time to grow up and will not have to worry too much about Mo Luo's targeting. Fortunately, after seeing the truth, Lu Zioqi breathed a sigh of relief. Originally, according to historical development, Zhu Yuanzhang wanted to end the rule of the Yuan dynasty and usher in the prosperous Ming dynasty. Next, it depends on how Lu Zioqi should deal with it. Moreover, after entering the small world, although it did not directly attack Lu Zioqi, it did intervene in the sky and struck Lu Zioqi violently. It did not stop until it found that he was immune to death. Whether to go with the flow or flip the table, the initiative lies in Lu Zioqi's hands. In other words. Furthermore, Lu Zioqi understood what kind of person Mo Luo was. Because this old guy was once one of the people he admired most. But after he reacted, he immediately thought of the so-called way to break the situation. Even if Lu Zioqi's opponent is just a demon statue, he cannot be underestimated. For nothing else. Not for anything else, just because the other party is Zhu Kongba. If Lu Zioqi kills him, won't this cause the Ming dynasty to cease to exist? The most terrifying thing is that life is worse than death. As long as he is killed, the development of this world will inevitably be disrupted and will no longer follow the historical trajectory. Although Lu Zioqi didn't know how she got involved in this history similar to ancient China. Don't you like this plot? No one is saying anything. If you don't like it, then I'm going to kill it. At that time, he will have a great possibility to use the chaos caused by time and space to return to his original world and regain his power. Not everyone can start like him and end up dominating the world. Because he knew that the other party had already made a move. Sometimes, death is not the most terrifying thing. So can Lu really be able to bear the power of cause and effect in this entire world? What if it can get some contact with the self? Therefore, Lu Zhaoqi is in a bit of a dilemma now. If there are no accidents, he should be the founding emperor who ended the rule of the Yuan dynasty and established the Ming dynasty. Don't say that he has 100 deaths cannot explain it. He is not afraid of death at all. Lu Zhaoqi, who has been contaminated with such huge karma, has no doubt that he will become a bad guy from beginning to end, and will be targeted by the entire world no matter where he goes. To kill or not to kill is a question. Global copy. My talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 458. After some conversation, Lu Zhaoqi finally understood what was going on. The story begins when Lu Zhaoqi enters the city. Lu Zhaoqi didn't have any guides. The guy he was eyeing was from the Red Turban Army. They originally planned to meet secretly in the inn to exchange information. In the end, this guy was severely beaten by the soldiers just because he glanced at Lu Zhaoqi in the crowd, and he couldn't even enter the city. Of course, this is his own fault. After all, it's not good to provoke anyone. You have to provoke someone from Lu, right? After arriving at the inn, Lu Zhaoqi's behavior attracted the attention of Zhu Kongba and others. Because the purse he took out belonged to the informant. That's why Zhu Kongba and the others secretly followed Lu Zhaoqi, and this led to the next development. After figuring out what was going on, Lu Zhaoqi couldn't help but marvel. This game played by Mo Luo was so clever that there was no flaw at all. Countless coincidences came together to place Zhu Yuanzhang, the destined son of this world, under Lu Zhaoqi's hands. Even life and death depended on his thoughts. If Lu Zhaoqi is not a time traveler, does not understand the history of China, and does not know who Zhu Kongba is. In the conflict between the two parties, even if Zhu Yuanzhang takes it again in the future, he may die at the hands of Lu Zhaoqi. Then, wouldn't Mara's goal be achieved? Even without bloodshed? Thinking of this, Lu Zhaoqi shuddered. Then again, Zhu Kongba, the future founding emperor, obviously regarded Lu as some kind of outside world expert who could figure things out. This can be seen from his respectful attitude and the temptation revealed in his words. However, Lu Zhaoqi had no intention of correcting this. After all, for him, the identity of this prophet is not inaccurate. Although Mr. Lu has not specifically studied Zhu Kongba's life, he still has some understanding of it through his experience. This guy started from humble beginnings, joined the Red Scarf Army Guozixing, and then started to make a fortune. Many stories also happened during this period, such as the much talked about Empress Ma Dejiao of the Ming dynasty, who was Guozixing's favorite daughter and was betrothed to Zhu Yuanzhang. So, my special Miao is obviously a time traveler with an urban imagination. Why did my painting style suddenly change into an alternate history novel? With a depressed look on her face, Lu Zhaoqi made a pot of tea in the courtyard, sat on a leisure chair and sighed while swinging. Time flies as the sun and the moon fly by. Lu Zhaoqi has been in this era of the late Yuan dynasty and the early Ming dynasty for almost 3 months. During this period, in addition to his rapid improvement in cultivation and becoming more and more ecstatic, his physical attributes had also reached an extremely abnormal level. If it were just an ordinary mortal in front of him, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he was invincible. And the fact that he can stay here and develop so peacefully is naturally a favor to Zhu Yuanzhang. Although this guy licks his face from time to time and comes over to spy on the secret. However, most of the time, Lu Zhaoqi still used various confusing methods to fool him. But intervening too much in Zhu Yuanzhang's development trajectory is the policy set by Lu Zhaoqi. He wants to see if this world can really evolve indefinitely according to the trajectory of history. But today is destined to be an extraordinary day. Seeing that Lu Zhaoqi was already looking drowsy, Zhu Kongba, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, walked in dusty. Seeing Lu Zhaoqi's leisurely and lazy look, he just forced a smile and said, "Sir, he is still so leisurely." It really makes seeing Zone, Zhu Kongba's alias, self-proclaimed, envious. It is worth mentioning that at this time he had changed his name to Zhu Yuanzhang. Seeing that he looked exhausted, Lu Zhaoqi said calmly without raising her eyelids, "Stop talking nonsense, honestly, what's the matter?" Only then did Zhu Yuanzhang smile and sigh, and began to vomit his bitterness. To summarize briefly, there are actually two things. The first thing is that the Yuan dynasty almost completely collapsed, and all the powerful forces were involved in political chaos. This caused their rebel army to completely lose control and begin to grow unscrupulously. In theory, this is a good thing. But what happened next was not quite right. Because their rapid expansion of territory finally attracted the fear of other forces. So the war broke out. This time their opponent was Chen Yaoliang, who was entrenched in Jiangxi, Hunan, and Hubei and had a vast territory and many soldiers. This guy is also a big celebrity, but he just has a bad name. Seeing that Zhu Yuanzhang was becoming more and more powerful, he led a powerful naval force eastward from Kaishi along the river to attack Yingtian Mansion, hoping to annex the territory occupied by Zhu Yuanzhang. And it was exactly this matter that Lao Zhu was worried about at this time. When Lu Zhaoqi heard this, he thought, "This is wrong. Hey! I'm not your counselor, why are you telling me this? Besides, this matter is also recorded in history. It seems to be called the Battle of Poyang Lake. It was almost this battle that established Lao Zhu's position as the king. But isn't the time a bit wrong? Isn't it too early? Zhu Yuanzhang's father-in-law has not even received his lunch yet. In other words, Lao Zhu is not the only one who has the final say in the Red Scarf army, so why did Chen Yaoliang just attack them without following common sense? No wonder Zhu Yuanzhang was so flustered. You must know that the real Poyang Lake War in history occurred after Zhu Yuanzhang became powerful. Even so, when Chen Yaoliang called, the group of people under Zhu Yuanzhang were still panicking, and they all suggested to avoid his attack and flee quickly. Only one of Zhu Yuanzhang's advisors named Lu Ji disagreed. When Zhu Yuanzhang finally asked him for his opinion, he said, "The enemy comes from afar to invade us, but we are waiting for work. Are we afraid that we will not win?" This is also true. Although the battle was tragic, it ended with Zhu Yuanzhang's victory. But at this time, Zhu Yuanzhang's power had not yet reached its peak, and even many of his generals had not returned to his cause. Even his father-in-law had different ideas. Under this premise, Chen Yaoliang came over. "Do you think Zhu Yuanzhang can still defeat him?" Lu Zhaoqi narrowed his eyes. "Looks like this guy is at it again. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 459. How can we fight a 600,000 strong army? Lao Zhu was frowning at the side, but Lu Zhaoqi was calmly holding a pot of tea, took a sip, and said leisurely, "Why are you panicking?" Zhu Yuanzhang's eyes suddenly lit up. He bowed respectfully to Lu Zhaoqi and said, "Sir, please teach me. How many troops do you have now?" Lu Zhaoqi rolled her eyes at Zhu Yuanzhang angrily and asked casually. This guy deliberately brought this matter up, just to get him to take action. Why was he pretending to be cool? 80,000. Zhu Yuanzhang did not dare to hide it and answered truthfully. Not only that, He also explained in detail that many of his capable men were still out on expeditions to expand their sphere of influence and would not be able to come back for support for a while. Otherwise, he should be able to gather 200 to 300,000 troops without any problem. It's only 80,000. Luzaoki frowned slightly. This situation was worse than he expected. This made him couldn't help but mutter, "This is a victory. It's hard for you to clean up the mess. Zhu Yuanzhang? Listen, is this human language? Am I thinking about how to win the other party now? 600,000 versus 80,000. Even if you think about it, you can't win at all. I just want to get through this disaster peacefully." Lao Zhu was thinking like this at this time. In fact, in the Battle of Fanyang Lake in original history, Zhu Yuanzhang also defeated Chen Yaoliang with less and more. Of course, his troops at that time were not 80,000 but 200,000, and they were 200,000 fully armed elite soldiers. And he won very dramatically. During their final decisive battle at Fanyang Lake, Chen Yaoliang had many soldiers and generals, and most of them were ships. But on Zhu Yuanzhang's side, most of them were. Logically speaking, this is not a battle of the same magnitude at all. However, Zhu Yuanzhang had quite a lot of talented people and strangers under his command, and they were able to create new tricks for this small ship. They gave full play to the strategic policy of when the enemy advances, we retreat, when the enemy is tired, we attack. We defeated the strong with the weak, and Chen Yaoliang's side was tempered. Are you talking about fighting? He couldn't hit the agile boat, and no one was chasing him fast. Chen Yaoliang was so angry that his beard became crooked. Of course, even so, Chen Yaoliang was not a fool, and he immediately came up with the method of capture the thief first. A large group of people headed directly towards the main ship where Zhu Yuanzhang was located, but they drove old Zhu to the ground and barely escaped death. In the end, it was Su De who shot the general leading the opposing team with an arrow, thus saving Zhu Yuanzhang's life. After that, I don't know whether Chen Yaoliang was kicked in the head by a donkey or it was God's will. He actually made a fool of himself, imitating Cao in the Battle of Chibi, and used iron chains to connect his fleet into one piece to deal with the opponent's overwhelming attacks. The outcome can be imagined. Zhu Yuanzhang copied the classic case of burning Red Cliff as he should, and successfully turned Chen Yaoliang's army into a barbecue. The whole process can only be described in a few hundred words, but in fact their battle, including the foreplay, has lasted for 3 years, and just the water battle in Fanyang Lake that decided the outcome took a long time. 37 days long. The above is the general process of Zhu Yuanzhang turning things around. Of course, this can only serve as a reference for the current situation. After all, the time, place and conditions are wrong. But then Luzaoki relaxed her brows, stood up, patted Zhu Yuanzhang on the shoulder and said, "Old Zhu, don't panic. Let's wait for work and fight them directly." Zhu Yuanzhang didn't care about Luzaoki's casual attitude, but he was a little disbelieving after hearing his words, "Follow them." "Yes, just do it," Luzaoki said decisively. "We only have 80,000 people, but the opposite side doesn't have 60,000 people. It's 600,000, Zhu Yuanzhang couldn't understand Luzaoki's thoughts. "I don't see any chance of winning at all. 80,000 vs 600,000, it can be said that an egg hits a stone. Not everyone is as fierce as Sparta, or a peerless man like Xiangyu who can carry a cauldron and fight to the death. What? Don't have confidence in yourself." Luzaoki frowned and looked at Zhu Yuanzhang with burning eyes. "Well, just tell me how many people you think you can handle against Chen Yaoliang's troops." Seeing that he didn't seem to be joking, Zhu Yuanzhang could only think about it seriously, and finally gritted his teeth and said, 150,000. "I'm sure." "That's great," Luzaoki clapped her hands and said with a smile, "then you deal with the 150,000. Leave it to me to handle the remaining 450,000. Zhu Yuanzhang? He almost thought he was hallucinating something and hearing something wrong. Sir, a single person is going to fight 450,000 people on the opposite side. What? Did he think it was 45 people? Let alone 45 people, with Mr. S' small body, 3 or 5 strong men were enough to press him to the ground and rub him. In fact, Zhu Yuanzhang was still a little disappointed when he heard this. Although he had seen some of Lu Xiaoqi's methods, he still lacked the necessary confidence in Lu Xiaoqi due to the disparity in strength and the huge gap between the two sides. Lu Xiaoqi didn't explain too much, just smiled slightly, stood up and walked into the room, took out a tips bag and handed it to Zhu Yuanzhang, smiling, "There are strategies I wrote for you in it. When Chen Yaoliang comes, I will give it to you. Open it. Remember, never open it in advance, otherwise it will be ineffective." Lu Xiaoqi said to herself, "If you know my arrangements in advance, how can I fill the cup?" Although Zhu Yuanzhang was disappointed in his heart, he did not show it on his face. He could only accept the package and accept it. In fact, Lu Xiaoqi's bold attack this time was also a test of Mo Luo, or this world. This is related to how he will deal with Mo Luo in the future, so naturally there is no room for error. Therefore, the tips he gave Zhu Yuanzhang contained a share of his magic power. Once someone touched him, he would be able to feel it immediately. After all, this world is still too friendly to him. In a world full of ordinary people, Lu Xiaoqi not only can cultivate immortality, but also has an extremely developed passive ability. If it were an ordinary adventurer, after losing his strength, he would probably be wasting his time. After all, their training methods are of no use in this world other than seeking death. There are no props in this world that can help them improve and restore their strength. At this time, Lu Xiaoqi finally understood the subtle reminder Wang Yanran gave him when she learned that he was going here. Just figured this out. He was a little curious, how did she know that she would experience this? Not to mention that Lu Xiaoqi's own destiny cannot be grasped, but simply speaking, Mo Luo, with his methods, is absolutely impossible to be spied on by Wang Yanran. Moreover, the difficulty of this copy is so high. How did their group of Riaos drive each other back into the dungeon? Not to mention anything else, just because of the ability of this one Mara, no matter how many sons they have, one slap will kill them all. Therefore, there are still a lot of unsolved mysteries waiting for Lu Xiaoqi to explore. But the most important thing for him right now is to successfully survive this disaster. Global copy, my talent is called Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. Author, Crying Boy Has Bad Luck. Chapter 460. Chen Yaoliang led hundreds of his own civil and military officials and an army of 600,000 to Nanchang in large ships and waterways. Seeing this news, Zhu Yuanzhang put down the letter in his hand, rubbed his head with a headache, and looked strange. Surprisingly, my husband really got it right? Only. Thinking of the plan his husband had given him, an uncertain look flashed in his eyes. The person standing on his left was his right-hand man Su Da. Seeing Zhu Yuanzhang's expression, he knew that he had been shaken and shouted hurriedly, "Brother, do you really want to listen to that pretty boy and give up on Nanchang City? We don't have many troops at hand. If we hold on to the city and defend it, we can hold on for a while. Maybe we can delay the reinforcements. If we just abandon the city and flee, then..." Unexpectedly, even if he didn't say anything, when he said it, Zhu Yuanzhang's expression became firmer. He directly interrupted Suda, "No need to say more. I believe Sir will not harm me." And he was smiling bitterly in his heart. How could he possibly be able to defend the opponent's 600,000 strong army with the few men he had? If you were to defend the city, the other party would only have to surround you and attack day and night. Within 10 days, you would be trapped and dead in Nanchang City with no ammunition or food. On the contrary, just like the strategy given by the gentleman, broken down into parts, and combined with the unique skills he gave, there is still some possibility of a comeback. After all, Zhu Yuanzhang was a man with the potential to be an emperor, and he still had some courage. Once the decision was made, he gave orders one after another very decisively to mobilize the army, and the entire force began to turn like a highly precise gear. 2 days passed by in a flash. When Chen Yaoliang led his troops all the way to Nanchang city, he was shocked to find that the city was already empty. Even the city gates are wide open. Is this guy crazy? Not to mention how shocked he was when he heard the news. It goes without saying how important Nanchang is. It is equivalent to the gateway between Chen Yaoliang and Zhu Yuanzhang. Whoever occupies it is equivalent to who has the initiative. Originally, Chen Yaoliang's surprise attack on Nanchang by waterway was just a dangerous plan, but he didn't expect Zhu Yuanzhang to be even weirder than him. The people simply stopped guarding the city and ran away. With this opponent, why worry about my failure? Chen Yaoliang stroked his long beard and almost burst into laughter. But at this moment, his ears moved slightly, and he inexplicably heard a dynamic tapping sound. Every beat of the slap sound seems to hit the heart directly, and it rhythms with the heartbeats of everyone. Huh? What is this sound? Not only him, but also many of his men heard this inexplicable sound. The combination of the moving melody and the unique charm of the guqin will instantly kill the ears of anyone who hears this piece for the first time. If you're not sure, search for the bad guy guqin version by yourself. He pointed at Lu Zioqi, his murderous intent clearly revealed. Chen Yaoliang said this, but his body did not move at all, and he even rode back a little. Fire the arrow. Shoot him to death. Chen Yaoliang killed the admonishing counselor with a backhand sword. He glared at everyone with a black face and shouted, "Anyone who shakes the morale of the army will be punished." He is not a fool, and he will definitely not risk his own safety when the situation is unclear. That's something only generals like to do. What does it have to do with me, Mr. Chen? And he didn't answer the questions below. He just smiled slightly and kept moving his hands, making the sound of the piano more exciting. This strange scene immediately made Chen Yaoliang's follow-up army stand on end and hesitate to move forward. As soon as the military orders were issued, generals and large numbers of troops swarmed into the city through the open gate. The sound will be noisy if the mind is disturbed, the sound will be pure if the mind is calm, the sound will be wrong if the heart is flustered, and the sound will be clear if the mind is in a state of mind. Listening to the sound of the piano is like looking at the heart. Kill the drums were beating, and the sound of killing shook the sky. It has to be said that the bad guy song played by Lu Zioqi at this time is definitely a new version of the song that these ancients have never heard of. Zhu Yuanzhang has always been careful with his troops and has never taken risks. Now that the city gates are wide open and there are no soldiers in sight, there must be an ambush in the city. Furthermore, the sound of the piano contains murderous intent. Lu Zioqi, however, was still sitting on the wall unmoved. With the blessing of his own magic power, the music he played could still be clearly audible even in such a noisy environment. Chen Yaoliang's face remained calm, but he winked at his subordinates. "Do you think I, Chen, am so scared?" A counselor in Chen Yaoliang's team listened carefully and closed his eyes to taste. This clanking sound is like the waves crashing on the shore, the wind and the remaining clouds, and there seems to be millions of heroic soldiers at the fingertips. It is like a mountain stream, crystal clear to the bottom, and it can't be done by anyone who is not relaxed and happy. Look. That man is at the top of the city. I want to see how he ambush me. Someone first spotted the figure of the person playing the piano and called out, "Sir, please don't act rashly. Are you trying to play an empty city with me? If our soldiers enter the city, they will definitely fall into their trap." There is no doubt that the person who dares to sit on the wall and cause Zhuliang to play the piano at this moment is none other than Lu Zioqi. This person must be very confident. The counselor cupped his hands towards Chen Yaoliang and said. What to lead by example? As the sound gradually became louder and clearer, everyone looked at each other, quite at a loss. This city gate seemed to have become the invisible mouth of the devil, swallowing up all the beings who dared to step inside. Chen Yaoliang's face was also uncertain. He looked steadily at Lu Zioqi on the city wall, who was still playing the piano by himself. After a while, he suddenly shouted, "Fire arrows for me!" He snorted, waved his hand and said, "Give me the order and lead the troops into the city." Immediately afterwards, the exciting sound of the piano sounded. The big man instantly understood what Chen Yaoliang meant, clapped his horse forward, waved his mace and shouted, "Who is playing the piano here?" However, after the generals entered the city, all news was lost instantly, and the shouts of killing stopped abruptly.